People without anxiety, what do you think about when nothing is going on? Story 1. I don't know how people can just sit and think about nothing. My brain is like a toddler on a sugar high, running wild and touching everything. The other day, I zoned out while doing dishes and ended up planning a 15-minute TED Talk on why sandwiches should be classified as tacos. By the time I snapped out of it, I was elbow-deep in soapy water, passionately arguing with my reflection about tortillas versus bread. My wife walked in and just shook her head. She's used to me by now. Story 2. So apparently some people just think about nothing when they're bored. Not me. The other day I was stuck in traffic, and my brain decided to calculate how many ducks it would take to fill a swimming pool. Not just any ducks, regular-sized mallards, obviously. By the time I got home, I had 3 different equations, and I was actually mad at myself for not knowing the average volume of a duck. I Googled it later. Turns out nobody else is asking these questions. Story 3. Someone once told me I should just go with the flow to relax. I tried it once. Big mistake. I went to a coffee shop and told myself, order whatever feels right. Somehow, I ended up asking the barista for a medium existential crisis. He laughed, I laughed, and then I panicked and ordered a latte I didn't even want. I drank it anyway because I couldn't face going back. Lesson learned, the flow is not for me. Story 4. I envy people who can sit and enjoy silence because my brain refuses to shut up. Last night I was trying to fall asleep, and my mind decided it was the perfect time to debate whether ants know we exist. Like, do they have some ant philosopher who's convinced we're gods, or are they just minding their business, completely oblivious? I stayed awake for an hour imagining an ant cult worshipping a giant human foot. This is why I drink so much coffee. Story 5. I used to think people were exaggerating when they talked about anxiety, but then it hit me. Out of nowhere, like a freight train. I was at work, busy but not stressed, when this wave of dread washed over me. Nothing specific caused it. It was just there. My chest felt tight, my palms were sweaty, and I kept pacing, trying to shake it off. I started obsessing over things I usually wouldn't care about, like, what if I messed up an email? Or, did I lock the front door this morning? Rationally, I knew these thoughts were ridiculous, but they wouldn't stop. I told myself, it's just a bad day, but it wasn't a one-time thing. Soon even basic stuff like making a phone call felt like climbing a mountain. One day I sat staring at my phone for hours, rehearsing every possible way the conversation could go wrong. When I finally mustered the courage to dial, I hung up the second it rang. It was embarrassing. It took therapy and medication to bring me back to something close to normal. But even now, I don't feel like the carefree person I was before. I get it now. Anxiety is a shadow you can't shake off. It just looms there, waiting. Story 6. I asked my friend how they stay so calm, and they said, I just live in the moment. So I tried it. 10 minutes into living in the moment, I realized my fridge was making a weird noise. Now I can't unhear it, and I'm convinced it's plotting something. Living in the moment is overrated when your moment is filled with the soundtrack of a refrigerator death rattle. Story 7. I never realized how much I leaned on the little things until COVID lockdowns hit. It started with Amazon packages. Waiting for them felt like opening gifts as a kid. I'd track them obsessively, even if it was something stupid like a pack of pens. Then I expanded the concept. I'd put one soda in the fridge at a time and tell myself, if I finish the day's work, I can have this. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it worked. I began to notice that having these small goals made even the dullest days feel bearable. It wasn't just about packages or drinks. I started planning tiny surprises for myself, like finally ordering that book I'd been eyeing or baking cookies on a random Wednesday. It hit me. This is how I keep myself happy. I've always looked forward to something, even if it's just sitting down for a TV show at night. When people ask how I stay upbeat, I tell them it's not about chasing big highs. It's about stringing together those small moments of joy. Without them, I think I'd lose my mind. Story 8. I tried to practice mindfulness the other day. You know, being in the moment and all that. So I sat on my couch, took a deep breath, and focused on my surroundings. Within 5 minutes, I was staring at my ceiling fan, wondering if anyone had ever tried to eat soup off a moving blade. Then I got up to Google it. Turns out I'm not good at mindfulness, but at least now I know soup and ceiling fans don't mix. Story 9. My wife says I live in a constant state of 7/10 happy, and honestly, I think she's right. My mood doesn't swing much. On a bad day, I might dip to a 6, and on the best day of my life, maybe I'll hit an 8. But I've never been one of those people who cries from joy or gets so excited they can't sit still. At the same time, I've never felt the crushing lows that some people talk about. It's weird, though, because sometimes I wonder what I'm missing. Like I've never opened a surprise gift and felt overwhelmed with emotion. I don't know what it's like to be so happy that you're shaking. I've never experienced those moments where you're just swept off your feet with joy. I envy it a little, but then I think about how lucky I am to have such stability. My life feels even-keeled, like cruising on a calm lake. Maybe I'll never ride the roller coaster of extreme highs, but I'll also never have to worry about crashing into the lows. It's not a bad trade-off, I think. Story 10. They say, don't sweat the small stuff, but they've clearly never been me. Yesterday, I spent 20 minutes debating whether to use a smiley face or an exclamation point in an email. Smiley face felt too casual, but exclamation point screamed, "Try hard." I finally hit send with neither, only to realize I forgot the attachment. So now I'm that guy. No punctuation, no professionalism, and no file. I'm expecting HR to email me back any minute. Story 11. Before I started medication, my anxiety was like having a malfunctioning smoke alarm in my head. It'd go off at the smallest hint of anything, real or imagined. A noise outside at night? My brain would immediately assume it was someone breaking in. If I was 5 minutes late to a meeting, I'd start sweating and picturing the worst. My boss yelling, getting fired, spiraling into homelessness. It wasn't logical, but logic doesn't matter when your body feels like it's in survival mode 24/7. What changed everything was this tiny white pill, Ativan. I'll never forget the first time it kicked in. I was walking to catch the train, something I did every day, and it hit me. I wasn't worried. I wasn't planning escape routes or backup plans for dinner. I was just walking. That's it. I almost cried on the spot because I realized how heavy the anxiety had been all these years. Now with therapy and medication, I have good days and bad days, but at least I know it's possible to feel normal. It's not freedom, it's just baseline. But baseline feels like a gift. Story 12. I've always had a strange relationship with happiness. It's like I know I'm supposed to enjoy the moment, but I rarely feel it. Even when everything is going well, my brain won't stop racing. It's always running what-if scenarios, like it's afraid something will go wrong if I relax for even a second. Therapy helped me understand that this is my anxiety talking, not me. But understanding doesn't always mean fixing. I try to counter it by focusing on small, tangible things. For example, I've started putting more effort into my hobbies. I'll spend hours designing a bookshelf I might not even build, but just the act of planning calms me down. Music also helps. I can get lost in a good album and let my mind wander. Still, I can't help but wonder what it's like to have a truly quiet mind. To sit there doing nothing and not have that nagging voice asking, "What's next? What if this doesn't work out?" It sounds so simple, but for me it feels impossible. Story 13. I used to think I was invincible when it came to stress. I had a high-pressure job, worked long hours, and always managed to keep my cool. Then one day, out of nowhere, it all caught up with me. I was standing behind the bar at work, mid-shift, when it happened. My chest tightened, my hands started shaking, and my brain felt like it was screaming at me to run. But my body wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the floor, completely paralyzed. It was my first panic attack, and it wouldn't be my last. For months, they kept coming. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, convinced something terrible was about to happen. Even when I wasn't having a full-blown attack, the anxiety lingered, like a dark cloud hovering over everything I did. I started avoiding anything that might trigger it: busy places, loud noises, even simple conversations with coworkers. My world got smaller and smaller until it felt like I was living in a cage of my own making. Eventually, I realized I couldn't go on like that. I quit my job and started focusing on myself for the first time in years. At first, it was terrifying. I didn't know who I was without the constant grind of work to distract me, but slowly, I began to rebuild. I started exercising, eating better, and taking long walks just to clear my head. I reconnected with old friends and found new hobbies that brought me joy. One day I woke up and realized I hadn't had a panic attack in weeks. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect now. Anxiety is still a part of my life, but it doesn't control me anymore. I've learned to recognize the warning signs and take steps to calm myself before it spirals out of control. And most importantly, I've learned to give myself grace. It's okay to not have everything figured out. Sometimes just getting through the day is enough, and that's something worth celebrating. Story 14. I overheard someone at work say their mind goes completely blank when they zone out. What's that like? Because when I zone out, I'm planning a zombie apocalypse survival strategy. Spoiler, I'd be the first one eaten. I'm too indecisive to pick a weapon, and I'd probably try to befriend a zombie just to avoid confrontation. So yeah, blank minds sound peaceful, but I'd be the guy negotiating with the undead and losing. Story 15. It's funny how anxiety can make you its hostage without you even noticing. I used to think I was just a perfectionist, but over time I realized my attention to detail was really a constant fear of screwing up. I remember one day at work, I had this simple email to send, but I spent an hour agonizing over every word. What if the tone was wrong? What if I accidentally offended someone? When I finally hit send, I felt like I'd just defused a bomb. It was exhausting. The worst part? That wasn't an isolated incident. Phone calls, casual conversations, even ordering at a restaurant became mini crises. Once they ran out of the item I wanted, and instead of picking something else, I panicked and just walked out. Therapy taught me to recognize these moments and not let them spiral. Now when I feel anxiety creeping in, I picture it as a cloud passing through the sky. I acknowledge it, but I don't hold on to it. It's a daily battle, but I've gotten better at not letting it win. Some days, though, I still catch myself wondering, what's it like to live without this constant hum of dread? Story 16. During the lockdown, my happiness started to revolve around the weirdest things, like delivery trucks. I'd track every package obsessively, refreshing the app every 10 minutes. When it finally arrived, I'd get this ridiculous rush of joy unboxing it, even if it was just paper towels. It reminded me of being a kid counting down to Christmas morning. I realized I needed those small bursts of excitement to break up the monotony, so I started creating them. I'd bake a cake and purposely save the first slice for the next day, just so I'd have something to look forward to. I'd pick a random movie, mark it on my calendar, and treat it like an event. It sounds silly, but it worked. Even now, I still use this trick. Life isn't always thrilling, but when you string together these tiny moments of joy, it gives you something to hold on to. I think that's the secret, really. Not waiting for happiness to come to you, but finding ways to create it yourself, even in the smallest things. Story 17. I read somewhere that delayed gratification is the key to happiness. So I bought my favorite soda, but didn't put it in the fridge right away. I told myself, you'll appreciate it more later. When I finally went to drink it, someone else had already finished it. The universe has taught me that instant gratification is underrated, and delayed gratification only works if you don't have roommates. Story 18. I've always been fascinated by the idea of thinking about nothing. People say they can just sit there, their minds completely quiet, and I don't get it. My brain doesn't have an off switch. Even when I'm zoning out, there's a song playing in the background. Or I'm replaying conversations in my head, imagining all the ways I could have said something smarter. Sometimes it's not even useful stuff. I'll plan fake scenarios like what I'd do if I found a lost dog, or how I'd escape if I were trapped in a bank robbery. It's not all bad. I've had some fun daydreams, but it's exhausting. The worst part is when those thoughts turn dark, spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Like, I'll be driving and suddenly picture myself getting into a horrific accident, even though there's no reason for it. It makes me wonder, what's it like to just be? To exist without constantly narrating or imagining or planning? It sounds peaceful, but I wouldn't know. My mind is always on, whether I want it to be or not. Story 19. During the pandemic, I discovered something about myself that I think I'd been ignoring for years. I'm really, really good at finding joy in small things. It started with Amazon packages. I wasn't buying anything extravagant, just essentials like soap or replacement cables for my headphones. But waiting for those packages became the highlight of my day. I'd check the tracking updates like a kid counting down to Christmas morning. When they finally arrived, I'd carefully open them, savoring the process like it was some kind of ritual. I know it sounds silly, but in a time when the world felt so bleak, those little moments of excitement kept me going. It didn't stop there. I started creating reasons to look forward to things. I'd plan a movie night with popcorn and candy, treating it like an event even though I was just watching Netflix in my pajamas. I'd bake cookies but save the first bite for the next day, just to extend the anticipation. I'd pick a random day to order my favorite takeout and make a big deal out of it, setting the table like I was at a fancy restaurant. At first I felt a little ridiculous, like I was grasping at straws to stay positive. But then I realized something. I'd been doing this my whole life. Even before the pandemic, I'd always found happiness in the little things. A morning cup of coffee, the first warm day of spring, or even just a good song coming on the radio. I think that's why I've always been pretty even-keeled. I don't get too caught up in chasing big, life-changing moments because I've learned to find joy in the ordinary. It's not that my life is perfect. I have bad days just like anyone else. But knowing there's always something to look forward to, even if it's just a new episode of a show or a piece of chocolate after dinner, helps me stay grounded. It's like building a safety net for your happiness, one little thread at a time. Story 20. People with quiet minds must be superheroes. Yesterday I tried to think about nothing, but instead I ended up wondering if pigeons ever get confused about where they're going. Do they have pigeon maps? Pigeon GPS? Is there some pigeon leader deciding where they all fly? By the time I stopped, I'd convinced myself pigeons are running an underground navigation empire. And honestly, I still have questions. Story 21. There was this moment years ago that changed everything for me. I was sitting at home after a long day, my head full of noise, anxiety, self-doubt, all of it swirling around like a storm. And then out of nowhere, I just stopped. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like a switch flipped in my brain. All the chaos quieted, and this strange calmness settled over me. I remember looking out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind and thinking, this is enough. That moment stuck with me. Since then, I've tried to live my life differently. Instead of chasing some grand happiness, I focus on the present. I started journaling, making time for hobbies, and appreciating the little things, like the smell of fresh coffee or the way the sun hits my desk in the morning. Don't get me wrong, life's not perfect. The noise comes back sometimes, but now I know it doesn't have to control me. I can let it pass. And when it does, I come back to that stillness. That reminder that even in the chaos, there's peace to be found. Story 22. I'll admit, I've always been a planner. Some people find it stressful, but for me, it's soothing. I'll map out my entire week, from the meals I'm going to cook to when I'll clean the house. My friends think it's overkill, but it keeps my mind at ease. I hate leaving things to chance. It feels like opening the door to chaos. But sometimes, I wonder if I'm missing out by being so structured. Like, what would it be like to just wing it? To wake up with no plan and see where the day takes me? I tried it once and I hated it. I spent the whole day feeling untethered, like I was floating without any direction. Maybe that's just who I am. I find comfort in knowing what's next, in crossing things off a list. And when there's nothing to plan, I let music take over. I'll sit there with my headphones on, letting the songs carry me to places I could never go in real life. It's not exactly living in the moment, but it's close enough for me. Story 23. I'll never forget the first time I realized my anxiety was controlling my life. It wasn't some big, dramatic event. It was something as mundane as ordering takeout. I'd been craving this one dish from my favorite place, so I called to place an order, only to find out they'd taken it off the menu. No big deal, right? For most people, maybe. But for me, my brain froze. I couldn't think of a backup order, and the silence on the other end of the line felt deafening. Panicked, I muttered something like, "Never mind," and hung up. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. I spent the rest of the night replaying the call in my head, beating myself up for how stupid I'd sounded. I couldn't bring myself to call them again for weeks because the embarrassment felt so overwhelming. Looking back, that was the moment I realized how much of my life I'd built around avoiding situations like that. I'd go out of my way to avoid phone calls, even if it meant extra hassle. I'd rehearse conversations in my head over and over, trying to prepare for every possible scenario, only to freeze when something unexpected happened. I couldn't make simple decisions without agonizing over whether I was choosing the right thing. It was exhausting. Therapy helped me see how irrational my fears were, but that didn't make them any less real. My therapist described my anxiety as a smoke alarm that goes off even when there's no fire. It made sense, but it didn't stop me from reacting like every little thing was a four-alarm blaze. Over time, I've learned to manage it better. When the anxiety starts creeping in, I remind myself it's just a thought. It doesn't have to define me. I visualize those thoughts as clouds passing through the sky, something I can acknowledge and let go. It's not a perfect system. I still have moments where the panic grips me, but I've gotten better at not letting it ruin my whole day. And honestly, when I look back at how much anxiety used to control me, even the small victories feel huge.